Welcome back, everybody. Today I'm going to cover some of the things about the new CCNA exam that's going to come out in February of 2020. The exams, you can start taking them on February 24th. So here is the exact exam code that you will be taking if you're going to take the new CCNA exam. If you're currently studying for the CCNA, I would either try to take the existing one before February 24th or start planning on taking the new one. The cost hasn't been really released yet, but I'm going to guess it's going to be somewhere between $300 and $350. The CCNA used to have where you had to take the ICND 1 before you could take the ICND 2. There's no longer any prerequisites in order to take the CCNA, and so that's a real nice benefit of the new CCNA. So here are the two new books that are going to get released. The first one, I've already done a quick overview of the book and what's in the table of contents of that. There's really not a whole lot that has changed, except the fact that they've put a lot of new wireless chapters in. It looks like they've taken some of the chapters that were in Volume 2 or the ICND 2 book and moved them into the Volume 1 book. But other than that, it looks like it's pretty much the same topics that was in the old CCNA in Volume 1 anyway. Volume 2 is a different story. That book has not been released yet. I'm going to guess it's going to get released somewhere in December or January. Here are the new exam topic weights. Basically, as you can see, the top three are the most important just because they hold the most weight of each of the exam topics. Network fundamentals, network access, IP connectivity, IP services, security fundamentals, automation, and programmability. Excuse me. In this video course, I'm going to go over each of those topics in detail. I'm just doing a quick introduction to this course. So each unit will be going in more detail other than what I'm putting into this video. In the introduction, we're going to talk about how to prepare or study for the CCNA routing and switching. What is the test made up of? How to register for the exam, keeping track of your progress, building your labs, and what are the network components. So the obvious thing here is you're going to need to read the book, of both books really, in order before you take the exam. Obviously, if the exam volume 2 book doesn't get released until December or January, and that gives you basically pretty close to 2 months to study for those particular chapters. In order to be prepared, you need to be able to be very familiar with the CLI, the commands. When you get to the certification exam, you cannot be fumbling around trying to figure out what command that you need to type. You just need to know what the commands are. There will be the question mark, obviously, but if you have to use a question mark for the entire exam, you will not have time to complete it. Take good notes. This is very important as you go through your study process, that you take good notes so you can keep reviewing what you've learned and try to keep that information fresh in your mind. Some of the things that you want to do is you want to utilize YouTube. You can subscribe to my channel, Big Country Tech, or you can use Google, because Google has a lot of good information and you'll be able to find a lot of videos through your Google searches. A lot of good documentation out there on different topics. So utilize Google as well. Um, do the chapter questions in the book. This will help you determine where you're weak and where you need to revisit certain topics. So make sure that you take time to do those questions and see where you're at. Um, One of the things, if you're not familiar with how Cisco has done their exams in the past, you might want to take some time and review this particular link that's in this slide deck that it goes through and kind of gives you examples of what types of the questions, the format, the drag and drops, the multiple choice, that kind of thing. So you're going to want to maybe review this link if you've never taken a Cisco exam before, so you know what to expect when you get there. Uh, so what do the exams consist of? For primarily, you're going to need to know the theory of all the different technologies, how they work, how to configure them, um, and what normal looks like, basically. So in that theory, you're going to learn a lot of that. And so, and then what you have to do, you're going to have some practical knowledge of that technology. You're going to have to know how to implement it. You're going to need to know how to troubleshoot it. For the exam, before you take the exam, you're going to need to register with Pearson VUE. And when you register with them, they'll give you a certification candidate ID. So when you register for your exam, that will be tied to you. So whenever you take additional Cisco exams, you will use that same candidate ID. Um, Along your Cisco training process, you're going to want to keep a progress um, book of where you're studying, how you're studying, and how much time you're putting towards each topic. Just because having a good study plan is very important to keeping you on task, um, and you're going to want to stick to it. Obviously, life happens. You're going to probably have some things that come up in your daily life that you're going to have to stray off every now and then. But you want to try to stick to your plan. Again, take good notes. There's a lot of new material that you'll learn throughout the course. So keeping it organized is very paramount. Some of the good things that applications you can use is Evernote. That's a good one, um, mainly for keeping your notes. You can pull snippets of configurations, commands, and paste that in there, and it'll kind of keep you organized. You want to review the material regularly. And the reason for that is because you want to keep that information fresh in your mind. If you haven't touched something in 6 months, more than likely you're not going to remember it exactly. So you want to constantly refresh your information in your mind. So when you get ready to take that test, it's somewhat familiar um, to you. So create a work-study balance. What you probably want to do is create some sort of a schedule. So and you want to try to keep it probably the same time each day. That way, um, you know from what time to what time you can study. What has worked best for me in the past was, I'll come home and I'll study from like 9 to midnight because people have already gone to bed and it's real quiet in the house, and I'll be able to do my studying at that time. You're going to need to build a lab environment, whether it's real hardware or it is virtual equipment. You're going to need to have some sort of environment that you can do labs on. Um, Some of the labs that I'm going to develop for this course are going to, some of them will only take between um, 5 to 10 minutes. Some of them could take you 3 to 4 hours. So, um, just to kind of give you an idea, some of them are going to be a little bit more involved than others. Some of them are real quick and easy, but you'll see as we go along. After the course lab is complete, what you'll want to do is maybe try to explore some of the other commands. Especially in a lab environment, you really can't hurt anything. The only thing that you're really going to do by exploring the other commands is kind of see what else is out there. There's a lot of things that is not covered in the CCNA, but if you have time, please explore those commands that are in um, the command. Um, what's the word for it? The command output that you can see all the different commands. The question mark. So when you're practicing your labs, you want to make sure that you're doing all of them, because the more that you practice these labs, the better off you're going to be, because it's going to build speed, it's going to build confidence. So make sure that you do all of those labs. When it comes to real versus virtual environments, here are just a few examples of some of the hardware devices that you can buy. Now, there's a lot of new hardware platforms out there than what you see on the screen, but just to keep in mind, you want to be very careful what you buy when you're buying physical hardware, because if you sit there and buy a bunch of useless gear that isn't going to be able to help you study the exam topics, then you just wasted all that money. So just be very careful, and we'll talk a little bit more about what models that you probably should stay away with, particularly the 3500s. The 3500s and the 3550s used to, well, they looked very similar to each other. The biggest thing is 3500, it was a layer 2 switch, which means it does not do any routing. Where if you have a layer 3 switch, such as a 3550 with the enhanced image, then you could do layer 3 switching with it, and you can do routing. Uh, so here's a few of the older models. 3550s, 3560s, 3750s, 3850s. All these are pretty much, I think, end of life now, or going end of life. But as far as what for the CCNA, the commands that you'll need to know, you could do on any of those platforms. From a router's perspective, you've got a lot of different options as well. 1800s, 2800s, 2900s. All those are probably end of life now, but again, those are still good routers as far as for learning the topics and the concepts on in the CCNA. When you get into the virtual environments, you do have GNS3. The application GNS3 is free, but you will have to get an iOS image to actually put into that software. Um, so you will need probably a CCO account in order to obtain a image, or you'll have to find some way of getting that. Um, Obviously, if you are if you work with Cisco every day, you'll probably have some of those images available to you, but they do not come included in GNS3. GNS3 is an emulator, which means it's basically taking a real Cisco IOS. It's not simulating those commands at all. So with an emulator, it's going to be very processor intensive versus something that's simulating it. This can run on a desktop or a server. What I'll be running it on is a Mac, but it can be ran on Windows, Linux as well. Cisco Viral. This is something that Cisco has came out with in the last few years. Um, One of the things to keep in mind is it's very resource intensive. So you'll need a pretty beefy box if you want to run this on your own hardware if you're going to run multiple devices within your environment. It is subscription based, so you will have to pay for a license for those particular to have access to the Cisco Viral environment. It can run on VMware, so if you run it on VMware, you'll need an ESXi server or a VMware workstation. Um, Packet Tracer. This is what would be considered a simulator. So it's actually simulating some of the commands and generating output based on the commands that you enter. EVNG is fairly new, and it's very somewhat similar to GNS3, where the fact that you still have to have the images, be able to, in order to run it, and it is an emulator. But you will need a desktop or a server to run that on. And there's some good videos out there on in YouTube on how to install this into Google Cloud environment. And so I'll probably do a video on how to install GNS3, how to install EVNG in later videos. So what are the network components that you'll run into when dealing with a network? Well, the networking field is a pretty wide scope of technologies. So there's going to be a wide, broad uh, list of components, and but I've got a few listed here that are pretty common. So with any network, the goal is to be able to share information. We want to be able to send emails. We want to be able to go to websites. Um, we want to be able to utilize that data in our own environments, in our own networks. And so we want to be able to go to the internet. We want to be able to pull down data from other people's web servers and things like that. So also, networks were built to share resources such as printers. Um, you know, years ago, printers used to be on just about everybody's desk, but now we can share those printers, share a particular printer across multiple users, and we don't have to have individual printers for each computer, which will save us a lot of money. Um, Application sharing, you can what I mean by application sharing is you can have an application running on a server or in the cloud, and we can just access that server across the network. We don't have to have individual software, desktop software for each individual application that we run when we're, which can get very costly. File sharing. With file sharing, we're basically we have files in a shared drive or a remote storage that everybody can, or based off of your access, will be able to put files and be able to retrieve files. Internet of Things is a newer topic in the IT world. Um, and if you have anything in your home as far as smart home devices like Alexa, that would also be considered part of the Internet of Things realm. In-host devices were probably most people are familiar with. We all have computers nowadays. Some people may have tablets. iPads, that kind of stuff. Telephones. Cisco phones are very common nowadays, especially in the business workplace. Everybody has cellular phones, so all those have IP addresses that will be joining networks. And then we have servers. Servers are what are in our computers or our personal computers would be talking to as far as pulling down websites or as a web server, maybe an FTP server where we're um, transferring files from one location to another. Um, Email servers, we're going to be talking to our email servers to pull down our emails or be able to send emails out to other places. And then we have network interfaces. Um, what I mean by that is on our routers or our switches, we can have maybe different types of interfaces. Some on our routers, most we'll be able to see serial interfaces, Ethernet interfaces, fiber interfaces, depending on what model and platform we're running in our environment. Uh, Switches typically won't have a serial interface, but they will typically have some sort of Ethernet, copper interfaces, or fiber interfaces. And then we get into cables. The more common cables that you'll see are the fiber optic cables, where we have a multi-mode, which is typically an orange or a light blue color. And then you also have a single mode, which are most of the time yellow in color. And the biggest difference between multi-mode and single mode is the distance that we can send data across um, those particular mediums. Multi-mode is typically for your shorter links, whereas single mode is typically for your longer distances. And then we get our Cat 5 or our Cat 6, which are our most common uh, copper Ethernet types. Um, and those are typically used for um, connecting our PCs to the network by a hardwired cable with our RJ45 connectors on each end. Um, Switches, that's how we're going to access our network. Um, Typically, our computers will plug into a switch, or if we have an access point, those will plug into switches, and we will, from an access point, we would wirelessly connect to the access point, which is hardwired into the network. Switches can be either layer 2, which means that they only frame switch, where layer 3 can frame switch and they can route our packets. And then we have routers. Typically, routers are used mainly to get us from one part of the network to another part of the network. This could be um, from one network internally to another network internally, which would be considered more of a LAN. And then it could also be used to uh, transmit us across a network, across a wide area network, using point to point circuits or lease circuits from a provider. Or we can have connections to the internet via routers and get us out into the cloud so that we can access other people's resources. Then we have next generation firewalls. Cisco Firepower is the newest platform, and with this, we have IPS capabilities. We have the ability to do um, Firepower AMP. We have the ability to do um, a lot of security things through Talos, um, because Talos is Cisco's security operations center that is reviewing um, the bad actors in the world and being able to dynamically um, create policies and push them down to our next generation firewalls. Then we have Cisco wireless access points. With wireless access points, um, we would connect via an Ethernet wireless network via uh, 802 dot uh, 802.11 G or A or B or AC. It really depends on what type of access points you have. Um, so, um, one of the things about controllers, our our access points can function as individual access points, or which are um, more difficult to manage. And so we have the ability to configure access points such that they are controlled by a wireless controller or a wireless LAN controller. And then we have DNA Center, which is fairly new concept, new platform that allows us to centrally manage our entire network through a central console, and we can do a lot of automation, and we can get a lot of information back from our network via the DNA Center console. That concludes this slide deck and this first introduction. Um, if I hope this slide deck and this information is helpful for you. Um, if um, if you like what you're hearing, and please subscribe to the channel. It does help me out as far as uh, keep me motivated to generate more videos. Please take the time to subscribe and look out for future videos coming for the new CCNA. Thank you, and see you in the next video.